One of the things I love about the sim racing community is that everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own story of how they discovered the hobby, how their love for it awakened, and just how they got here. So one of the things I've been wanting to do for a while is create this sort of collaboration style video, reaching out to other sim racing YouTubers and just allowing them to share their story. Share maybe what their first sim racing title was, what their first wheel was, how they discovered this hobby, and how their love for it awakened. So I have quite a few YouTubers who are going to share their own story in this, and I hope you enjoy it. First off though, I'm just going to give a brief blurb about how I discovered sim racing and my love for it awakened. So growing up as a kid, I always enjoyed racing, be it NASCAR, GT racing, even monster trucks. And one of the first racing games I'd got was Monster Truck Madness and Monster Truck Madness 2. And those games were a lot of fun, and it really awakened this competitive side in me. And then my dad, one time, he came home with a new game, NASCAR Racing 1999 edition by Papyrus. This was a game that made a very significant impact on me. It was one that, honestly, I didn't do much racing in. I honestly did more wrecking, driving the car to the pits, and then just being astounded at the sound effects of the pit crew, sawing off body panels, things like that. Also, I spent quite a bit of time in the paint editor that they had, where I might have butchered Jeff Gordon's livery a few times. So yeah, that was one of the first experiences I had with sim racing. And then after that, I spent quite a while apart from sim racing because ultimately, while I had my toes wet in it, I didn't really understand what it was. So one day I went to a local video rental store and they had this competition with Crash Team Racing. And I won second place in that event. And they said you could pick out any game that you wanted. And the game I chose, Eve of Extinction, a PlayStation 2 title, and I beat it in a week. It was a cruddy game, third-person action game. It was nothing really to write home about. It had that weird plot where your weapon ended up being your girlfriend. So actually the modern Bionic Commando remake ended up stealing that idea, I guess. So yeah, but I went back to the video store and they said, oh yeah, you can just give it back and pick another game. And the game I picked then, Gran Turismo 3. I was intrigued by the car on the title and I was just curious about it. I fire it up and I'm like, where has this been all my life? I'm sinking hours into it. I'm driving, buying all the different cars, enjoying it. And then I got the Mad Catz MC2 wheel for the PlayStation. And that really helped augment the experience and just had a lot of fun with it. And then I was discovering the PC side of sim racing. In roughly 2006, 2007, I found this EA Sports pack that had NASCAR sim racing in it. And I was intrigued because I got flashbacks to NASCAR Racing 1999 season. And I was like, this could be interesting. So I got that game, I fired it up, and I was like, wow, this is bringing back memories of what I used to enjoy as a kid. So that was my way that I entered the rabbit hole of the world of sim racing. After that, I quickly got my first PC wheel, the Logitech NASCAR, followed by the Logitech Momo. So the Logitech Momo is what I would call my first serious force feedback wheel. And my true awakening of sim racing was likely sparked by Gran Turismo 3 at the beginning, and then my spark into the PC world of sim racing, my renaissance, my revival, was in NASCAR sim racing. Now, I'm going to take it to some other YouTubers where they can share their love of sim racing and where they got their start.
Hey y'all, this is Random Callsign here, and Will has asked me at gunpoint how did I discover it and started at sim racing. My first interaction with sim racing was back in 1993 with Microprocess, Jeff Cremens, Formula 1 GP, so this was a long time ago. It was my first way through into sim racing, but then you had to go all the way to 2010s where I started properly with sim racing and I started to develop an interest. The first way I started developing an interest was, believe it or not, with the PlayStation 3, Gran Turismo 5 and 6, online racing and all of that. Then I discovered Inside Sim Racing on YouTube, with Shaun Cole and everybody else. Got myself an interest there and moved into Assetto Corsa and started competing in leagues in ptsims.net, which is a Portuguese sim racing group. As for equipment, my first wheel was a Cytec R440. This was a long time ago with a very, very bad force feedback wheel, but it did work. And then I moved myself into a Logitech G25, and from that point onwards, I got myself the YouTube channel and started moving forward, and that's basically it.
Hey, William, thanks for doing this. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'll tell you my sim racing journey. I'm a product of the 90s. I grew up with Nintendo and Sega and Super Nintendo, onto PlayStation and Xbox and all that stuff, but I always kind of gravitated towards the racing games. And I remember getting a PlayStation 1 steering wheel and pedal set. The thing was absolutely garbage. It was a glorified D-pad. So I didn't really even use it that much because it was so bad. But I played a bunch of Ridge Racer on PlayStation, and I absolutely loved that game. Logged a lot of hours into that. Moving on from there, I went into Xbox 360 and Forza Motorsports. Forza Motorsports is really what turned me into kind of like, I guess you would say like a video gamer that raced racing games into like, hey, it kind of led me into sim racing. So say what you will about Forza Motorsports, but it got me to where I am today with iRacing and everything. But I had the original Xbox 360 wireless steering wheel and pedal set. It had a little bit of force feedback, and it was great. I loved that. I played so much Forza Motorsports back in the day. And I remember thinking like, okay, this steering wheel is okay, but I want something bigger and better to increase the immersion level. So I'm looking at reviews of different stuff and, the Fanatic reviews of different equipment and everything. And I kept hearing iRacing, and it just never really stuck. I was interested in the products. So I upgraded to the Forza Motorsports steering wheel and the CSR Fanatic pedals, and I had a load cell and everything. So I got that equipment, so I was running that just on a regular office desk, not like an actual rig or anything. And so I'm playing Forza Motorsports, and I'm like, man, this game, it's like you spend 20 minutes in a menu, matchmaking, and then you spend 10 minutes in a race, and everyone's wrecking, and it's stupid. So I'm like, there's got to be something better out there. And I just remember, as I was looking at products, they talked about iRacing. So I'm like, okay, let's figure out what this is. So I'm looking at videos, I'm looking at the website, and I'm like, I'm intimidated by iRacing when I first saw it. And this was back in, oh gosh, if it wasn't early 2014, late 2013, something like that. So I was like, all right, let's just jump in. It's like 3 months or whatever subscription, however it was, 1 month or 3 months. So I'm like, okay, if I don't like it, no big deal. And I was hooked immediately. It was Mazda at Lime Rock Park at the time. That's where I got started into iRacing. And I was absolutely hooked. The intimidation went out the window. I mean, it was exactly what I was looking for. And my setup at the time, like I said, the Forza Motorsports wheel with the CSR load cell pedals, it wasn't bad. I mean, that's fine. That's all you need for iRacing. But after a while, I heard about Fanatic coming out with their version 2.0 wheelbase, and then you could get the rims for it. So I'm like, okay. So when that first released, I was ready for it. So I made a pre-order and got the Fanatic version 2.0 wheelbase, and then I got the Porsche RSR rim for it, and that was a great setup. I used that for many years. Upgraded to the Heisenfeld Pro pedals, And then recently, about a year ago, I was able to get my hands on a VRS Direct Force Pro. It's a direct drive wheelbase, and I was able to convert the Fanatic Porsche RSR rim over to it. So that's the setup I'm on now. Direct drive with the Porsche rim and the Heisenfeld Pro pedals. And I think I'll be good for a while. So yeah, ever since I got into iRacing, I haven't looked back. I've tried other sims, ACC, regular Assetto Corsa, but iRacing is where it's at. And it's not. You can argue about physics and tire model and force feedback, but the online competition for iRacing is by far the best. So that's kind of my journey into sim racing. It's always in steps, you never want to go from 0 to 100. There's always that leveling up, and it's really about immersion. Us sim racers, we want to feel like we're in the car. We're surrounded by monitors. We want to feel that force feedback. We want to have that load cell break. That's what it's all about. I think immersion. None of this stuff's going to make you better. I've seen people with broken G25 set world record time. So I think the hobbyists in us and the sim racers in us, we like the immersion. So that's really what that's all about. But yeah, thanks for doing this, William. Appreciate you having me. And there you go. There's my story. Hope you liked it.
Hello everyone, and thank you, William, for having me. My name is Jardier, and I'm talking about how I started in sim racing and started with racing games and such. And it was a very good question from William, because I really don't remember much from my beginnings, how I discovered it. But I remember my earliest memory of driving or literally being in a racing video game or car video game was Test Drive 2 on Sega Genesis. It was 1987 released, but I was playing it in 1992 or something like that, because I'm 88 born. I think 1992, 1993, something like that. I remember playing that on Sega, on TV, It was freaking amazing. Test Drive 2, it was so amazing, so advanced back then. It was the first game I remember playing that was racing. Of course, like a young kid, I was playing all type of video games and such. I think the most interesting was in around 1999 or something like that. I think I remember playing Grand Prix 2, which was at the back of the time or back in the day. It was really advanced. It was basically like a simulation of racing games, because they were all Formula 1 cars with the screen in front of them. So you literally sit in the Formula car with the screen in front of you and driving in the Grand Prix 2. It was really bigger the deal back then. I think that's my basically a first also experience with a wheel and such, and so on. Of course, then some time passed. I remember the earliest where I basically for myself, I date when I started doing sim racing or racing overall. I dated when I started racing online. That's basically when I all started, because I was playing Toka 2, I was playing the Test Drive, Need for Speed, all these type of games together with everything else, basically Half-Life 1, Half-Life 2, whatever. And basically my earliest when I literally started online gaming was in 2004. I remember back in high school, my friend told me there's a super awesome racing game which you can play online. It's a demo right now, and I should definitely try it. So I log in the night. It was a Live for Speed. And first time on a keyboard, I've been driving on a demo and a multiplayer. It was 12 people, maybe even more on the track. And it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. Me and my friend, we were winning all the races, and we basically started, we bought the game. Then we have been playing for 6 months on a Czech sim racing league. And then after a year or almost a year, I bought my first wheel. That was a Logitech Driving Force Pro. Not the new one, the old one in 2004. And my world blown away, It was absolutely everything was different, everything was crazy. It was amazing, so realistic, playing Live for Speed with a horrible netcode, against other drivers. It was really, really good. Then everything changed with Air Factor 1 that released in 2005, I think. There was immediately in a game, I didn't want the game at the beginning, but then immediately they released a Porsche Carrera Cup. And I was a big fan of Porsche. And Carrera Cup overall, so I really wanted to go into it, and I gave the game a try, and I basically stood with the game for many, many years, because there wasn't much going on. Of course, Gran Turismo on PlayStation and such, but on a PC there was nothing extra good with the multiplayer at the moment. It was a best game so far. So I got stuck with R Factor 1. I got myself G25. It was the first wheel with the clutch and the 8 shifter. That was really, really wicked. Big advanced technology, you know. So I was playing like R Factor 1 a lot. And then in 2008, iRacing released. I was like, in the beginning, I wasn't interested at all because I didn't even have a credit card properly and such. I didn't even know how it works online and such, so I wasn't possible to drive it. But then I went to like a gathering of Czech sim racing community, and one guy had the iRacing, and I was like, wow, it's pretty awesome, you know. And I tried it, and in 2008 I started playing iRacing a lot. Basically, that was like highlight of my sim racing career, what do you want to call it. In 2010, 2011, I was in an iRacing World Championship because I really wanted to compare, like my goal in like 2010, 2009 was compare myself to big drivers, you know, because I was racing on the Czech sim racing communities and some European small communities. I was winning a lot. It was all a lot of fun. And then I was like, well, I should maybe look past it, you know, see how really good I am. So I started racing iRacing. I managed to get in iRacing World Championship. I did like last 3 races in 2010, and then I did some races in 2011. Sadly, it was a bad time for me in my life because like I was young, you know, I was first time in a job and such, and so I wasn't able to put my time into it. I remember I did like first 3 races in 2011 with Formula 1 car in iRacing World Championship. I managed to get 3rd place behind Gregor Hutu. It felt really, really good. I was like 4th in the championship after like 3 rounds or stuff like that. And after that, I had to DNF because I couldn't race anymore. I had like, my life just changed. You know, it was bad times. Like basically since 2008, 2015, it was not very good time for me. I would say, 2013, it wasn't a very good time for me. So I was basically stopped racing for like 2-3 years. Then I gave it a go with Assetto Corsa 1. That was pretty good. Before that, actually, I was playing Netcar a bit because I wanted to know like how Assetto Corsa is going to be. So let's see, like half a year I was playing Netcar, which was pretty damn good. And then I got stuck with Assetto Corsa for a couple of years. But it was like a dark times for me because, as I said, like literally at 2011 I stopped sim racing properly, and I took like a 4-year not break, but I was doing other stuff, you know. I was still racing and a Czech sim racing and such, but not in a higher level. And I had myself I bought myself in 2010, 11. I bought myself Trustmaster T500. It was pretty awesome. It was a very good wheel. And yeah, then I was driving iRacing, I was driving Assetto Corsa, I was driving R Factor 1, R Factor 2 basically as well, trying all the games all like mixed up. And then I started with Race Room as well in 2016. It was wicked. That's how I got into it. Then I basically decided like 2 years ago, I decided I could maybe, I was doing like videos, like sometimes like hot laps and Nordschleife laps and such, but nothing serious. And then I was a big fan of Dr. Disrespect when he started like 3 years ago. I was a big fan of him, and I was like, wow, this is pretty awesome. The streaming and having face camera and everything. I was always like a little showman and having fun and jokes and such. So I basically decided to get it a go, and my channel like not blew up, but it started like crazy. It was really interesting. I had like 100 subscribers, and then suddenly in 1 month I have like 1,200, and it was really nice to having a little community, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, guys. And now we're here, like playing Assetto Corsa Competizione, iRacing, everything all together, and with epic equipment, as you can see. And it's awesome. It's awesome. I freaking love it. I'm just addicted to sim racing, guys. I talk too much. I know, guys. That's why I'm a horrible, crazy streaming YouTuber, because I just never shut up. So yeah, I can talk forever. I'm sorry, William. I'm sorry for taking your time.
Hello everyone, I'm Crash, this is RTA Motorsports, and I'm going to give you my story and how I got into sim racing. My story, I'm sticking to it. So yeah, pretty much for as far back as I could remember, me and my family, we never watched team sports. We never really watched football or baseball or anything like that. We did watch a lot of UFC. One of our bonding things that we always bonded over was cars. Race cars, muscle cars, anything related to the vehicle. My dad was a welder fabricator back then. He had his own business, and a lot of our friends used to race at the local oval track back in New York. So every weekend they were either racing in modifieds or figure eight, and we used to go support our friends, our family friends, as well as repair their cars. So I was always around that environment, everything had to do with race cars in my life at the time. If you ask my family, one of the first things they would tell you when I was a little baby is I used to always mumble something and then say, does it make it go faster? Growing up in that environment, all I ever wanted to do was be in a race car. Back when, probably around 1997, I got my PlayStation 1 around that time. Every game that I got from there on up pretty much had something to do with a car premise to it. One of the first big car games that I got was the Need for Speed. Around that time, we also got our first PC, and it ran on Windows 95, and it came with a bundle. If I was not playing the Need for Speed, I was playing Monster Truck Madness on the computer. Now that computer, it was able to handle Monster Truck Madness on like medium to low settings. And I remember there was just no thought in my mind of really buying any other PC games. I didn't even know how to go about buying PC games at the time. My dad wasn't really into PC gaming. We were very much into music and everything like that. So a lot of the games I played were mainly on the console until I would say 97, 98. Our local library, they started getting these computers in, and they were modern, everything like that. And they used to allow you to rent PC games to play on the PC, so that way kids can be more accustomed to being on the PC. And they had the Need for Speed, or Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, and that game just kind of blew my mind. Just the fact that, you know, cops could chase you and everything like that. There was a huge, you know, dogfight behind the wheel of a vehicle. That was absolutely amazing. Soon after that, I got Driver for my PlayStation, and that game I sunk endless hours into. And the funny part is, after I actually beat the game, I remember I used to just drive around in the game following normal street rules. I wanted a game where I could just drive. Around that time, me and my dad built our first go-kart, my first go-kart. And so everything was based around, I just wanted to be behind the wheel of something. Once PlayStation 2 came, of course, Grand Theft Auto was one of the titles I sunk many, many hours into. And I just kind of went down the rabbit hole of console gaming with racing into it. Never really got into the serious sim racing titles because mainly I just never really knew about them. Once I got out of college, just always dreamed about building my own PC. And it wasn't until really in 2014, me and my wife moved out to California. I started looking online for parts, how to do it. So I got into this game really late, really recently, actually. So I built my first PC, and I stumbled across a video from Inside Sim Racing. And Inside Sim Racing, it was really late at night. I think I was watching some racing game review. I don't even remember what it was, but I remembered the video. Shaun and Darren Ganji were building a budget rig based out of wood. And I remember watching this video and my mind was blown. I was like, what is sim racing? How can I sign up? Now that I have a gaming PC, how can we do this? So then I pretty much stayed up that whole night watching almost all their videos that they had at the time. Got into a video about iRacing, how to start in iRacing, how to subscribe. And that was actually one of the first titles that I got into on the PC. That weekend, I went out and bought my first wheel, was a T100 racing wheel, 240 degrees of rotation. At the same time, at Fry's Electronics, I bought my first rig, which was a Playseat Challenge. Shortly after, built a wooden sawhorse rig that housed monitors. Ended up building it up to be a triple screen monitor setup. Kept watching more videos, getting enveloped into it. Ended up hand building H-pattern shifter because at the time we just moved to California, didn't really have the money to buy an H-pattern shifter. Built an H-pattern shifter from a flight stick, built a handbrake from a flight stick and RC car shocks. And then just shortly after, stepped up to a Thrustmaster TX wheelbase and pedals, bought an H-pattern shifter, and just slowly really fell head over heels for this hobby. I gotta say, around 2014, that's really when it flipped from gaming titles to really sim racing once I was able to actually build my first modern gaming PC. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I'm Crash. This is RTA Motorsports. Thank you for your time. See you all next time.
Hello, fellow sim racers, and first of all, thank you to William for inviting me to take part in this video. I guess I'm going to tell you how I got started in sim racing. For me, it started way back in 1993 when Microprose released a game called Grand Prix, which was designed by a rather well-known man called Jeff Crammon, who went on to produce lots of Formula One games for the PC platform. My dad bought it for his desktop PC during the height of Mansell Mania in the UK, and he couldn't get me off of it. In fact, when he upgraded his computer the following year, the old PC ended up in my bedroom, and as like a 9 or 10-year-old boy, having a PC back in the early 90s was an incredibly rare thing, and I would play on that game all of the time. And it was the Grand Prix games that sort of continued my progression through for a long time. I dabbled with stuff like R Factor a bit later on when that came out, but it was the Jeff Crammon games that were really the core of my early sim racing stuff. I then got into a lot of console gaming during that interim period between those Jeff Crammon games and the sort of current sim racing scene. In fact, it was Assetto Corsa coming out for the PlayStation 4 that sort of teased me back to the PC. I bought it on PlayStation 4, realized there were a whole bunch of mods that were available if I went back and went onto the PC and upgraded my PC, and sort of didn't look back from there, really. So I actually have to credit console gaming for bringing me back into sim racing 4 or 5 years ago now. And since then, I've played every possible racing sim, and I guess the rest is history.
Greetings, my name is Billy Strange from the aptly named Billy Strange Racing YouTube channel. And before I get going, I'd like to take a quick second and thank Will at Sim Racing Paddock for including me in this video, and I really look forward to everyone else's response in this video as well. You know, I wanted to be just like my dad. My dad's still my hero to this day, and when I was really small, he would put me in his race cars, the people that he was driving for rather, and I would stand in that seat and I would play with the steering wheel pretending like I was just like him. The first virtual experience that I can remember having was at a Round Table Pizza. I remember him putting his knee against a stand-up pole position cabinet, and I was either standing or sitting on his knee and using the steering wheel. And my parents didn't have a whole lot of money, but they managed to save up enough money and wait for the Nintendo to be incredibly cheap. And then we bought one, and our mainstays were Alan Sir Jr.'s Turbo Racing, Days of Thunder, Bill Elliott's NASCAR Challenge. In fact, we often rented those before they got cheap enough to buy. From there, fast forward just a little bit to when the Genesis and the Super Nintendo were really cheap and we could afford them. We played a lot of Mario and Andretti Racing, which was because of the dirt sprint car in it. And then we also played on the Super Nintendo F1 Rock. And then I kind of backed away from gaming when I became a teenager, really got into playing guitar, trying to start a band, learning how to sing, that kind of thing. And what brought me back was Resident Evil, Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, and Gran Turismo. That car PG style of game with a more realistic bend on what it could be like in playing a car racing game. Just a handful of years after that, I started racing dirt sprint cars, and then fast forward just a little more into the fall of 2011. Forza Motorsport 4 came out. I was incredibly excited for this game, got it first day, played the heck out of it on the 360, and at that time I had also started watching YouTube and come across some wheel and pedal reviews. And the thing that seemed to be coming up that I was really excited for the Xbox 360 was the Fanatec CSR Elite wheelbase and the pedals. I saved up a little money, purchased those, and immediately had a shift in my mentality from playing on a gamepad to playing on a wheel and pedal set. I also, by the way, purchased the Fanatec wheel stand at the same time. Jump ahead to 2014, I've been watching a whole lot more YouTube, seeing all these cool PC sim racing games that are starting to come out, and I had to be a part of it. I wanted to know what it was like to try one of these, and I made the plunge. I believe at the time I bought a few months of iRacing, Race Room, R Factor 1, R Factor 2, and I believe I purchased Assetto Corsa in early access. The final step that really made me love sim racing like I do now was with Automobilista. They released the Caterhams and Cadwell Park, and that combination was the first time I really felt like I was driving a race car. I had started road racing at that time, and it was just incredible. If anything, I hope this illustrates a possible journey for sim racing. So if you get frustrated, realize that it may take a while to get into it. You have to find things that suit you, and there's really not a whole lot of right or wrong ways about doing this. It's all up to you. The whole point in this is to have fun. And I hope you remember that the next time you get frustrated with sim racing. All right, well, that's it for me. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Thanks.
What's going on, guys? It's Mike for SimRacing604, and I want to just start this off by saying a huge thank you to Will from Sim Racing Paddock for having me as part of this project. It's a very exciting project. I'm looking forward to seeing the finished product. So thank you, Will, for having me as part of this. And my story of how I got into sim racing. So sim racing, like most of you, came to me after racing games. So I'm a bit older than a lot of you, so I have to go back. The first game I remember playing on PC, at least, was Test Drive 2. And just to give you an idea of the era of computing we're in, I used up, down, left, right as controls for that game. So it was a really difficult experience. Used to get chased by the police, and there was no volume control on PC speakers at that time, so it would just be this awful wailing police sound. And I used to play it at night while my parents were upstairs asleep, and I had to put pillows in front of the computer to keep the noise down. So that was the first game I remember playing, but racing games have always been sort of a part of my life. And then fast forward to 1998 or 1999, I was working at a restaurant, and one of my friends there, he not only worked at the restaurant, but he worked at a video game store. And he approached me one day and said, Mike, you're a fan of racing games. Have you heard of Gran Turismo? And he was going on about how good it was. And my first impression was, what kind of a name is Gran Turismo? I thought it was awful. I was used to Need for Speed and Test Drive and simple things like that. And but I bought it. I believed him. He was a friend of mine. And really just, I can't overstate how much that game changed how I look at racing games, period. You hear stories of musicians when they were getting into music, and the first time they heard the Beatles or Nirvana or the Marshall Mathers LP or something like that, they never looked at music the same. Well, I never looked at racing games the same once I had tried Gran Turismo. It just completely blew my mind in every respect. Racing games for me went from, you win races and you get the next best car. You progress from Porsche to Ferrari to Lamborghini, whatever it was, and just your car beats everybody else. It's not so much about technique, it's your car. It wasn't so with Gran Turismo. It mattered, front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, mid-engine, front engine, and you had to learn racing lines. This was when games came with booklets. And I remember taking the booklet like around the house and reading it. And I remember reading it on break at work and just learning more about racing lines. And again, I just can't overstate how much this flipped my perception of racing games on its head. It was just a mind-blowing experience. And played every Gran Turismo 1 through 6. And then when PlayStation 4 came out, I did buy a PS4. One of the first things I looked into was racing games. And Drive Club was in there, of course, and Project Cars was in there. And I started playing Project Cars and played it with a controller, had a bit of success. A lot of fun with the first PC and first Project Cars, I should say. And then there was this new game coming out that had a cool Ferrari on the cover. That's what attracted me to it. And it was called Assetto Corsa. And this was, of course, the console debut of Assetto Corsa. And tried it out when it was released. And I was terrible. Much worse than I had been in any other racing game ever. And I remember starting out in the career just at the lowest tier, and I can't remember, I guess it's the Abarth or whatever the car was, the lowest rung, the first race of career, and I couldn't, not only could I not win, I could barely not come last. And I was just like, what am I doing wrong here? And so I did some research online, how the heck do people win races in Assetto Corsa? And as the information online was saying, well, you need a wheel, that'll help immensely. So I did. I went on my local paper and or my local buy and sell, and managed to find a used G29 and got a really good deal on it. And I still have that wheel, G29, great wheel. And started playing, and I didn't have much more success initially. But that feeling of turning a near real life size wheel and, modulating your throttle and brake. I had wheels in the past, but nothing that rumbled, nothing with the fidelity of the G29. And again, it just blew my mind. And I was like, okay, this is it. Like, I found my new passion, and I remember being enamored with it once again, on a different level this time. So continued on with G29, got a little bit better, and then those same websites I went to see how to get faster in Assetto Corsa were also suggesting that the PC version of Assetto Corsa is where it's at. So buckled down, saved up a bit, got a PC, and managed to get things going with what is now known as Sim Racing 604. So yeah, my journey into sim racing primarily comes down to two key moments. One, the first time I played Gran Turismo, just unbelievably impactful game. And the second one was playing with the wheel on Assetto Corsa console. I think the console release of Assetto Corsa kind of irked a lot of people because it was sort of a PC only thing, and it was something the sim purists were trying to sort of hold as their own. But I think it did open up a lot of people's eyes to sim racing, myself included. So that is my journey into sim racing. And once again, thank you, Will, for having me as part of this, and thank you guys for watching. And we'll see you later.
How did I start sim racing? Probably the mid-90s. When my dad brought home Jeff Cramond's Grand Prix, the original one that mimicked the sort of fake 1991 season. So my brother would play that, and I'd watch, and then sort of play with A, Z, comma, and dot on the keyboard. That was kind of where I kind of discovered it in its earliest form, I should say. And then later on, I sort of went through Grand Prix 2, Grand Prix 3, Grand Prix 4, and then Grand Prix Manager, and basically all the Micropro stuff. F197 on the PlayStation and on the PC, the Toka games by Codemasters. And then I sort of went away from it and then got really into flight simming, because at that time I was sort of like 12, 13. I was looking to join the Royal Air Force, but couldn't because of health conditions and things like that. So I kind of stayed with flight simming. Then I realised that the community there is just absolutely awful. And then sort of gravitated back towards sim racing in about 2016, because I picked something up. I don't know what it was, but I was ill. And then that's where I started watching, your Jimmy Broadbents and your Empty Boxes and those sorts of people. Sort of got into it and just thought, oh, this has really expanded and got better over the last few years. So once I was better and working again, bought a wheel, upgraded my computer, started a YouTube channel. Well, started putting sim racing content on my YouTube channel around sort of the summer of 2017, and now here. So mad, really, isn't it?
So the question is, how did I get my start in sim racing? And to be honest with you, it's kind of hard to answer that question. If I think back in time when I was a child, unfortunately, it was before gaming even existed. When I went to the arcade, we used pennies and nickels. You played foosball, you played skee ball, I guess that's the same thing, air hockey. There were no video games. So for me, the catalyst of sim racing was long before sim racing would be called sim racing. It was the beginning of motorsport gaming. It was the beginning of games that were focused on cars, bikes, trucks, things like that. I think back, the very first memory I have of anything to do with sim racing, is a game called Evel Knievel. It had one control, a throttle, that's it. And you made the bike go, and it jumped buses, and you had to land on the other ramp. And if you didn't make it, it crashed. If you made it, it added another bus, and then you'd have to go a little faster. That was it. From there, it was on to other games. I mean, obviously, I think back to the game Pole Position in the arcade. Again, my motorsport gaming career began before we could play the games that we play today on a PC or even on the console. They were in the arcade. It did then transfer into arcade gaming at home with the Atari 2600. I don't remember which games we were playing back then. And to be honest with you, my whole career in sim racing began before these titles were even sims. So now we could fast forward a little bit in time and get to the point where we were playing games like Grand Prix by Microprose, where we were playing games like Sports Car GT by Image Space Incorporated, aka R Factor people. And then it was later in the 90s, literally mid to late 90s, when we started seeing things like NASCAR games got a lot better, the second generation of the Grand Prix games. And then Grand Prix Legends, I think, is the game. I was going to say Sports Car GT because it really added elements to racing games that I hadn't seen yet. But it was Grand Prix Legends that I think made me think, wow, this is getting serious. This is the future of motorsport gaming. And then it's only gotten better since then. When I think of the hardware side of things, going back in time, I mean, it's easy to say. The first time I played video games, motorsport games, I was using a controller. I was using a keyboard, perhaps. Like, how many clicks to make a left turn with the left arrow button? I remember using joysticks. I remember using many different the original steering wheels. So the T1 by Thrustmaster, the T2 by Thrustmaster. I remember the early Logitechs like Sidewinder wheels. I had an Act Labs wheel with the first shifter that I can remember even being available. First 5-speed shifter I ever remember in sim racing was by Act Labs, and I had to have one. I went through 20 red Momos until I decided I was tired of breaking inexpensive gear, and that's when I bought a Thomas Super Wheel. And again, this is NASCAR 2003 Grand Prix Legends era, and that's when it started getting really serious for me. That's when it wasn't just a pile of broken plastic wheels. That's when I was like, okay, I'm all in. I'm going to spend $1,000 on a steering wheel for a hobby that nobody in the world even knows what we're doing. And that's when things really took off for me. That's when I started racing very seriously. That's when I started joining leagues very seriously. It's when I started administering leagues, hosting races, broadcasting races. And then from there, it just took off and it never really stopped. So yeah, my motorsport gaming career, my sim racing catalyst, I have to give credit to some of the original titles though. I mean, I'd always been into cars as a child. But again, thinking back in time, I don't remember the name, but there was like an 8-top arcade game where 2 people on each side. So 4 sides, 2 people per side, 2 wheels per side. And it was a top-down RC Pro-Am type game that I just played endlessly as a child. And then again, in the arcade world, again, I'm going to bring up Pole Position. When Pole Position came out, final lap! I lost my mind. When you could sit down in an arcade game, play with the steering wheel and pedals, and actually feel like you were in a car. I didn't even know what we were getting into at the time. But that game, Pole Position, in the arcade, might have been the one, without me even realizing at the time, that I was just dying for the next racing game to come out. So that's how I got my start in sim racing. I hope that helps.
So I originally thought that this was going to be a pretty easy question to answer, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the roots of my involvement in sim racing go right back to pretty much my earliest memories as a child, about 3 years old. So as a kid growing up, my parents, or my dad, had a Commodore Amiga, which some of you guys might be familiar with. Now, we had a couple of games on the Amiga that I remember playing as a kid. Ferrari Formula 1 was the first title that I can remember ever being exposed to, and that was a really kind of crude in many ways, but very advanced in many other ways kind of game. You had to steer with a mouse, so you used the mouse inputs for your steering. Left click was accelerate, right click was brake from memory, but it had some really advanced car setup features. You could go into a wind tunnel and make adjustments, and yeah, in many ways it was actually pretty advanced. Now, we also had Test Drive was another game that we played. Test Drive 2 as well, of course, it came out a little bit later on, where you kind of had to run from the cops. And that was sort of my roots into the computer gaming world in general. My involvement was always kind of based around racing games rather than, you know, things like first-person shooters or fantasy or anything like that. So up until about 1994, those were really the only games that I was playing at all. Then we got our first Mac when I was in year 4 at school. And I remember around 1996, so year 6, we picked up IndyCar Racing 2, which was my first proper sim racing title. And I can remember I spent more time sort of, you know, modifying things and creating car skins and liveries and stuff like that than I did actually playing the game. So I was really sort of more interested in the technical side of things. But again, sort of up until that point, I was pretty much an outdoors kind of kid. Didn't spend a whole lot of time playing games, but those were the sorts of games that I was playing growing up. Then in 1996, had some pretty full-on changes in circumstances. My parents split up, and I found myself spending a lot more time indoors playing computer games. So we picked up a PlayStation or a PSX in 1996. And I can remember there were a couple of titles that I played absolutely to death on that. I can remember waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning and playing before school every day. So Porsche Challenge and Rallycross were two of the titles that we originally got with the PlayStation. And then I have a very vivid memory of being in a cash converters store or a pawn shop and seeing F1 97 on the shelf for only $20. And at the time, the game was $100 in the stores. So I can remember buying that and playing that absolutely to death as well. And one of the things that I loved about that, I remember, was the broadcast overlays that it had for all the live timing and things like that. It really sort of transported you into the world of, you know, being a real race car driver, which was something that I really enjoyed. So yeah, V-Rally was another one that I can remember just doing lap after lap after lap and split screening with my brother as well. And around about 1997, 98 was when I got my first wheel, which was a pretty crude thing. It was called the V3 racing wheel, and you kind of had to sit on it. It had these little things that went under your legs to sort of support it. Pedals as well, of course. Didn't have a clutch, just a throttle and a brake. And it had a digital and analog mode. So for games that didn't support analog wheels or, you know, progressive steering inputs, you could switch it into digital mode. And basically what it meant was it acted like a D-pad. So when you turned beyond, I think it was about 20 degrees, it was steering. And when you went back past 20 degrees, or below 20 degrees, it wasn't doing anything. So you kind of had to steer like crazy to kind of get the car to do what you wanted to do. But we made do with it. So PlayStation was pretty much all I did up until about 99 when I built my first PC. And my first online racing experience was through the world of ICQ. Some of you guys might remember ICQ, where I managed to somehow get involved with a couple of guys that played Sega Rally Championship 2. And that was my first online racing experience. We were back on dial-up internet at that point in time. And to be honest with you guys, most people in Australia actually didn't even have internet access for a couple more years. We were still on dial-up. But yeah, my first real entry into proper online racing was actually Motocross Madness 2. I can remember my last couple of years of high school, I got really competitively involved in that. I was actually in the top team in Australia and ended up being probably about 5th ranked in the world at one point. I remember just spending hours and hours and hours every day. I had a force feedback joystick, a Microsoft Sidewinder, I think it was called. And yeah, just playing that game absolutely insanely huge amounts of time. It was ridiculous how much I played that game, but yeah. And then, you know, other games that I was playing around the time, Toka, Touring Cars, Grid. I played a lot of Need for Speed Underground as well. That was another game that I really enjoyed. But then about 2004, got my first proper girlfriend and pretty much just dropped out of gaming altogether until about 2010 when I started working at Sony. So I started working at Sony 2010, picked up a PlayStation 3 and started getting more involved again. So Gran Turismo 5, F1 2010 as well, and then built another PC, my first water-cooled PC in 2012, and started to get more into the casual side of things again. But throughout all of those years, my main interest and my main focus was in real-world track time, you know, building real-world track cars and project cars and stuff like that, and that was actually how this channel got started. But as adult responsibility started to kick in, my first child was born in 2014 and then my second child in 2016, spending time at the track and spending money on real life cars was becoming more and more difficult. So I remember very vividly sending a text message to my younger brother in 2018, probably around about October, and saying to him, I'm thinking about buying either a mountain bike to get more exercise or a sim racing rig and buying some Fanatic gear. And I remember him saying, I think you should get the bike, and I actually ended up buying both. But that was sort of my entry into proper sim racing there. So around about October 2018, I bought a Fanatic Club Sport wheelbase 2.5, some Club Sport V3 pedals, and that was my entry. So initially I got involved in F1 2018 through a local league, Octane Online Racing, and that was a lot of fun. And it wasn't until probably about a year ago now that I got involved in iRacing, and then moved on from there into a bunch of other stuff which you see on the channel now. But really, my interest in sim racing was sparked primarily from my anxiety, and this is something that I've talked a little bit about on the channel in the past. So I suffer very severely from a generalized anxiety disorder, and it really stifles the enjoyment that I get out of doing things like taking a real life car to the track. You know, my anxiety around having an accident or injuring myself generally sort of detracts from the overall enjoyment. So I thought that sim racing would be something that would be a really great outlet and something that I could do competitively without sort of having that same level of fear that kind of stifled the enjoyment in the past. And that has really proven to be the case. So the reason why I love sim racing so much and why I'm so involved in the community and why I've actually turned it into my full-time job now is just simply because it's something that I can do and something that I can enjoy and something that can bring out my competitive side without sort of pushing me beyond my comfort zones in terms of my anxiety. So it's something that I can really sort of use as an outlet, something that I can use as a creativity release as well, and something that I can just enjoy without pushing myself beyond my limits and, sort of stifling that enjoyment factor. So really love getting involved in the community, really just love everything about sim racing, and it's something that I can see myself doing for a very, very long time into the future. So yeah, that is how I got involved in sim racing. It's been a very, very long journey, but certainly very glad that I'm here now. So yeah, that's it.
So I got into sim racing properly back in about 2012 or so, but of course, like a lot of people, the story starts a long time before that with games like F1 97, Gran Turismo, all of them. I just thoroughly played them to death. Same with Choco Touring cars as well. And in those games, in those scenarios, I just pretend that it was like me as a racing driver. I used to, when I was younger, and of course still now, I used to really want to be a racing driver. That was like my biggest goal of my life, was to do that. So I used to just pretend I was one while playing the game. Then Gran Turismo 5 came out, and I shifted all my effort onto that. This is before I kind of knew what anything like esports was or anything like that. I just played online for fun with a controller. I used to just basically main the Nürburgring, the Nordschleife. Even back then, I used to always drive around in a stock car, a NASCAR, because I thought it was hilarious how terrible they were to drive. Then I had this one race online. It was at Deep Forest Raceway in reverse in the Super GT cars. I was driving the Callsign GTR, and the other guy was driving the Tom's Castrol Supra. And I remember this so clearly because it was the moment I thought, man, this is amazing. I had this great battle with this one guy throughout the race. There was no contact, not really anyway, and we had this really great, really strategic race. And I thought, I want more of that. And unfortunately, at the time, that didn't really exist that much in GT for an amateur player like myself. I wasn't really involved in any leagues or anything like that. So I went to my my really terrible laptop at the time and looked up online racing. And some of the things that came up were videos of R Factor. I remember vividly watching a mod of the 91 Ferrari going around, I think it was Hockenheim, and just the noise that it made. And I'm a bit of an audiophile, so when I heard the noise of that car being in a game, I was like, oh my, this is amazing, especially after GT5 not having the best sound samples as well. So that, and I think a bit of inside sim racing actually convinced me to go and buy a PC, and I bought a G27, a really basic G27. And from then, I just drove anything I could get my hands on. A lot of R Factor mods. I really enjoyed the historic F1 mods in R Factor. Also, DRM mod as well. That was really fun. Really great experience of those old turbo boxes. Amazing. And then I got into iRacing and had my first iRacing race where I was wrecked on the straight by a very angry South African man is what I meant to say. And the abusive beatdown he gave me was enough for me not to want to play again for a while. But it was after I got past that initial people online are scary, I basically just threw myself at it, and I guess the rest of that is on my YouTube channel. But yeah, that's how I got into sim racing.
So yeah, guys, those were some great stories. I truly enjoyed watching them. I just enjoy hearing about you guys and your love of sim racing and what helped bring you here. Because if it wasn't for those titles and things like that, we wouldn't be watching you right now. So yeah, guys, also to the audience, I would love to hear your story as well. What brought you into this world of sim racing? Let us know in the comments. Also, if you enjoy these collaborations, I would love to hear your thoughts on what other questions you would like to hear. So, thank you for watching. For the Sim Racing Paddock, I'm William Marsh, and have a great rest of your day.
Gamer Muscle is the Zodiac Killer.